Hello everyone, is Bringonthechaos Glizzy for another. What if Beerus is an Olympian god of destruction? Beerus has been erased because of the mistake Goku, but he encountered the fathers of all angels. He is in a new world field of gods. What will happen to our former G.O.D?
Communicates with anyone that isn't one of her own children, and Pontus prefers to keep to himself these days. That leaves only Styx and Gia, as far as I'm aware, and given that the former was still in her residence around the underworld a few days ago, according to Palace, it's almost impossible she's the one either. I have little doubt she and her children have made way for where they are though, given they left there, and I could not see them from up here. He scoffed. Which means she was concealing their path from me. What other reason would she have to hide herself and her children from under my nose if not to go wherever they are? It didn't surprise him much there. That damned woman and her children had never liked him or his rule. Forget about that though. How has our recruitment been going of the other deities? Fairly good, my lord. Plenty of them have come forward to support you should they be needed. There are quite a number who have yet to respond though, or have outright refused to be a part of the conflict. I'm assuming that Oceanus was one of the latter. Yes. I'm afraid so, Lord Kronos. Had he not been in such concentration using the throne to scan all over the endless world, Kronos would have rolled his eyes. Don't be. He was too much of a coward to join me and the rest of our brothers when we dethroned and cut down our father, so his cowardice now is unsurprising. Very well. Atlas nodded. I suppose I'll leave you to it then, my lord. He gave a short bow before he turned and made his way out of the singular throne room. As he left, Kronos, for what had to be the 1000th time at this stage, crushed the inkling of fear that attempted to claw its way inside him, as he redoubled his efforts looking down from the heavens. I'll find you, you little prick. That damned prophecy will never come true. He muttered angrily, after a moment. Even if you should manage to achieve your own true divine form, Beerus, I will still be victorious by the end of this little war you declared on me. I must prevail. You truly are in the utmost of denial, aren't you? Kronos stilled in his seat. His concentration over the throne's power wavering completely as a distorted masculine voice reached his ears through the wind. One that he hadn't heard in a long, long time. Before his very eyes, mist and small clouds suddenly seeped in out of nowhere, and began to form just a few meters in front of him, creating the shape of a bearded face with glowing, bluish-white eyes that he never thought he'd see again, in any capacity. You're still the same fool you were back all those years ago, when you slew me for your own petty gain. The mist and cloud-formed face sneered at him mockingly. Kronos' body shook, as his hands gripped and dug into the armrests of the throne, cracking the celestial stone as his eyes glowed gold. Pushing down the shock he felt, as he stared balefully at the cloudy visage. And just what in Tartarus' name do you think you're doing back here, in my throne room, you piece of shit? Your throne room. The cloudy visage repeated derisively. Mocking him with his tone once again. This will never be your throne room, brat. You're just the ungrateful punk who stole it from me after reducing me to this pitiful state. Also, you and the rest of my disgustingly ugly sons could shoddily rule the universe yourselves. Oh, that's rich coming from you, father. Kronos sneered back. You were nothing more than a tyrant to us all from the day we were born. There wasn't a single one of us that didn't despise you and your awful rule. Me and my brothers did everyone else a favor by ousting you. Just as your son will do everyone else a favor, when he gets rid of you. Urano's cloudy form countered back with a dark smile. You think yourself better than me, you foolish boy, but you never have been. Everything is going along as I have decreed. Your own eldest son has finally come along to take you down, and no matter how futilely you try to stop what I have forecasted, it will only end in your defeat. Kronos grit his teeth. His menacing aura coating over his body as he opened up his left hand and materialized the scythe he'd used to cut his father down in it. His hand damn near crushed the shaft as he gripped it tight and glared at the cloudy visage with nothing but contempt. No, father. I will overcome your damned prophecy. I refuse to be slain like you were. You will overcome nothing, boy. Uranos stated as resolutely as one would an absolute fact. I have seen the future, and I know it is set in stone. Your efforts will be in vain. By the end of this war, I assure you, your fate will be far worse than mine. Kronos' scythe suddenly swung out with his arm, as he pushed himself off the throne. The power from the swing created a shockwave so strong it splintered the entire floor beneath him and shook the very foundations of the castle and the mountain protected by divine magic. The blade passed right through the cloudy form of Uranos and dispersed it with ease, but this got Kronos nothing but a bark of laughter from the primordial of the heavens. The chilling sound of his laughter reverberated everywhere around the angered Titan King, still mocking him to the end. I look forward to watching you squirm, as you try hopelessly to overcome the fate that I have given you, son. The last word was said with no amount of affection. There was only a malicious edge to it, as he jeered at him. Only your own destruction awaits, and I cannot wait to watch that come to pass. With that, his presence vanished completely. His final words echoing in the wind, only taunting Kronos further. Kronos' divine heart raced, as space and time spasmed and walked around him with his rage. His other hand clenching hard enough almost to draw his ichor, as he glared wrathfully at the spot where his father's cloudy form had once been. Damn you, father, the ruler of the universe spat, as he felt Atlas' presence, as well as that of his brothers, minus Hyperion, coming toward him. No doubt to ask what was going on with him, and why he'd just shaken Mount Othries. He couldn't find it in him to give a damn though. The only thing on his mind was what his blasted father had uttered, and the weight of finality that had been behind them. His paranoia shot through the roof as they stuck to him. A fate worse than yours. No, no, I will not let that happen. I refuse to play into your hands, you senile bastard. Try as he might to crush it and convince himself that his dear old dad was just messing with him to throw him off his game, fear once again clawed at him from the inside. More than ever before at his apparent fate. A fate he was willing to do whatever it took to avoid. Nay, he would avoid. There was no other option for him. He had to. He must. Back on Crete, around that same time. You've come to personally aid me, have you? Was the first thing that came from Beerus's mouth after hearing this new goddess' very direct introduction. One brow having risen as surprise slowly gave way to curiosity. That is correct. Styx nodded affirmatively. Her beatific features grinning as she motioned towards the four hooded figures behind her. And I have no doubts that we are but only the first to come to you. For you see, whilst you and your siblings have a personal grudge to hold against your father Kronos, the current ruler of the cosmos, for his abhorrent actions against you, there are plenty of us who have been under his rule for quite some time who, to put it lightly, are quite dissatisfied with it. Though she was being tame, it was not difficult for either Beerus or Zeus to hear the resentment and vitriol in her tone when she said, dissatisfied. It was clear to both that her feelings toward the bastard father resembled much closer to genuine hatred than anything else, and she wasn't bothering to hide it. Oh, but before we go further into any of that, Styx moved her head to look behind her, at the four hooded figures in line. All of you, please, remove your cloaks and introduce yourselves. There is no need now to conceal yourselves. They all quickly followed their mother's instructions. Their cloaks falling back off their bodies as though they'd never been attached in the first place and disintegrating into golden particles the instant that they touched the ground. All to reveal four rather unique individuals. Starting from the far left was a physically imposing brute of a man with more tanned skin that stood over 8 feet tall, with a bald head and a hooked nose to go along with an incredibly sturdy, square jawline. His face set into a deep scowl with not even a microgram of fat to it. Cheeks literally looking like they'd been carved out of granite with how thick they looked. His gaze was hard and strong, unblinking as he stared at them with completely dark eyes. He wore a white tunic that only covered the right side of his upper body with the exclusion of the arm and fell to about his knees. His upper body that was exposed rippling with insanely dense and large muscles bigger than both Beerus and Zeus, a hard chest and rock-hard abs. Veins literally crawling all over his enormous arms and the rest of his huge figure. Biceps bulging outward without even the tiniest flex on his part. His legs appearing so massive and heavily muscled as well that they may well be thicker than a tree trunk. While not to the same extent Atlas did with outward appearance, there was no denying that through looks alone, the man practically personified strength itself. Kratos. The giant man said tersely with a deep, gruff voice that sounded like gravel. He gave a tilt of his head respectfully towards Beerus, and partially Zeus as well, before crossing his beefy arms and not uttering another word. Beside the behemoth was a woman of much less stature, who stood about half a foot shorter than then Beerus and Zeus, just under 6 foot. She was fair-skinned, with hair that was blonde like Demeter's, but a bit darker and flowed down just past her rear and spilled over her shoulders, with the ends of her locks curling around and covering her ears from view almost entirely. Her face was naturally beautiful in a way that would have taken the breath out of most mortals from Beerus's previous universe, as pretty much every female deity seemed to have the capacity for here. She held dark red lips underneath a small button nose just a little bigger than Demeter's and witty-set yellow-brown eyes below a high forehead just a tad shorter than Hestia's. Her chin was just a little bigger than Hera's, with a sharp and narrow jawline much the same and cheeks that were almost as high and sharp. Her tunic was the same color as the hulking man beside her, with it also leaving her lithe, but toned arms bare, along with a section near her armpits and around her chest area down close to the center, exposing a good deal of side boob and cleavage from her perky, pearly white, C-cup breasts. It reached down around her thick thighs, acting more like a slim skirt than anything else, and leaving her slim, but also impressively toned legs bare for the most part as well. Her build was clearly more athletic, but still held a small waist and wide hips. One thing that momentarily caught both Beerus and Zeus's attention though was the look in her eyes, one that projected just as much of an unyielding gaze as the tall, bulky and brutish man's. The only difference was, hers seemed to be much more forceful in the way she looked them, mostly Beerus, over. And whatever she must have seen in Beerus's eyes as he held strong and unmoved in the slightest by it, got her to smile lightly and give a slight, respectful bow of her head. "It is an honor to meet you, Beerus," she all but exclaimed with a clearly feminine, yet hard voice that conveyed a very outgoing and unabashed persona, as she placed her hands firmly on her hips. "My name is Beer, and I look forward to aiding you in whatever way I can in the war you have declared on the Crooked One." The crooked one. Beerus's brow rose again, higher this time, at the moniker. She was clearly talking about Kronos there. He supposed crooked was one way to describe that prick, but given the way no one reacted, it was apparent that it was something he'd been referred to as for quite some time. Likely long before any of his siblings and he had been born. A nickname. One given to Kronos by his own brothers for his cunning and dirty fighting tactics in their early years. Another voice, one distinctly more masculine than Beerus, explained to her right. Beerus's and Zeus's attention went to him. A pale-skinned man with long, dark hair that reached down to his upper back and was about as tall as him. His face held a hard, square jawline like Kratos, just less pronounced. His cheekbones were near razor sharp, leading down to a sturdy chin and up to a more normal-looking nose. His caramel eyes full of zeal as he looked back at Beerus. A similar tunic to the bigger man's worn by him, only for the other side of his upper body to be covered, excluding the arm. This exposed his fully defined abs and impressively muscled body, noticeably slimmer than the other males, with much more sleekly muscled arms and legs that brought his physique closer to that of an elite-level swimmer's. Of course, he continued. I'm sure you can tell that such a moniker fits him well for far more than simply how he fights. An excited smile leapt forth to his features. Which is why his defeat will feel so sweet in the end. The man respectfully bowed forward with one hand to his chest as he uttered passionately, I am zealous. It is a pleasure to meet the one who has caused such a stir as of late with his actions. You have no idea how thrilled our mother was at hearing the news of what you'd done on Mount Othries, and I must say that I too am much the same. I'm sure we all are. The two brothers' gaze shifted finally to the last of the figures, as her feminine voice drew them in. She was, quite obviously, exceedingly beautiful with a pale complexion and was reasonably tall, standing just a few inches shorter than Beer. Her long, vibrant brown hair fell down to about the middle of her back and like Beer's also fell down over her shoulders, where it started to curl and become wavier. Her lips were full and red, with a tiny chin smaller than any other and a jawline just a little less sharp and narrow than Beer's, with higher cheekbones to compensate. A pair of witty set eyes the same color as her hair gazing back at Beerus pleasantly beneath a forehead just as high as the other woman with a comparably sized button nose to match. Her tunic, just as white as her siblings, flowed down near her feet but parted away the closer to the bottom like some kind of split dress. This showed off her creamy, slender legs that were almost as toned as Beer's with slightly more thick thighs and did well to show off her own slim waist and wide hips. Her lithe, but athletic-looking arms were also bared as well with a section exposed near her armpits and one on her chest as well, though only to about a third of it, revealing a small bit of her own ample cleavage and a decent amount of side boob from her D-cup breasts. It's a pleasure for me to be meeting you as well, Beerus. She continued with a courteous bow of her own, hands clasped in front of her by her pelvis. Her expression quite hopeful. I am Nike, and I am here like my siblings and mother to offer you any support you may need to ensure a decisive victory in your war against Kronos. This is certainly not something I was expecting, Beerus thought to himself, as he eyed the 5 newcomers. In all honesty though, he probably shouldn't have been. If that so-called father of his was brazen and depraved enough to devour his own children, prophecy be damned as an excuse, then it didn't come as a surprise to him that he was a real piece of work in general. One great enough to at least run afoul of a number of people to rise up against him, especially given what Gia had told him before about him sending those Cyclopes and Heka whatever down into a horrible place, from what he'd gathered, called Tartarus. Truth be told though, he just hadn't cared. All that mattered was the slight he'd dealt to him specifically, as well as his fellow siblings Sans Zeus to a lesser degree. It wasn't until now, however, where some such folks had gone out of their way to come here to him directly, that it properly sunk in for him. And also gave him a question. How did you even know we were here? It was Gia who gave me the general direction of where you were. Styx revealed without hesitation, glancing over him towards the smiling primordial. After hearing of your exploits, I let her know of my interest in you and asked her of your whereabouts, and she let me know of an isle a fair distance off from where I was that you were on. One protected by her magic, which once I set foot on, I would know was the right one immediately, due to the way her power permeated throughout it. I see. Beerus glanced behind himself at her as well, somewhat bemusedly. Able to catch himself before he asked how that was even possible when she'd been here the entire time. Because he understood quickly just how silly that would sound talking about that woman. Her physical form may have been here, but by her own admission, she was the earth itself. Thus, given what she'd said, he didn't doubt that even with her being here in more physical form, she could still hear and feel everything going on land, because it all was just a part of her. Communicating with her, for anyone, pretty much was as well be as simple as just looking down and talking to the ground, it seemed. And I must say, she raised her voice a little more, just to ensure the others could hear her in case they hadn't before. Her eyes quickly scanning over the 5 other presences she'd felt outside of Beerus and Zeus that she hadn't recognized and noting each of their expressions before her gaze flickered over to the mother of 7. It is good to see you again, Rhea. It has been some time. Her amused stare then shifted slightly to the final figure. One she'd noticed earlier upon arrival here too but hadn't commented on at the time. Though that certainly wasn't to say she wasn't pleased to see her. And you're definitely a sight for sore eyes, Metis. Big sister, said Oceanid broke out of her small stupor, just then. Controlling the surprise she held at seeing her fellow Oceanid, and second-generation Titaness appear so suddenly with her children in tow. It is good to see you too. Beerus might have risen a brow at Metis revealed there that Styx was apparently her older sister. Given that all of them could essentially be traced back to Gia, however, as far as he knew, that meant they were all pretty much related. Something that still did, and likely would persist to mentally perturb him for some time, unless he was given a good reason at some point as to why such a thing was different here than in his old world. Once again though, he pushed that away as there were more important matters to attend to. Brother, I believe you should take her up on this offer. Zeus said earnestly whilst glancing to his elder, bringing Beerus's attention to him. It can never hurt to have more allies in a conflict such as this. I don't doubt our bastard father will likely be getting more support himself outside of his brothers and nephew that were with him during the time we escaped. All from other gods that are more in line with his rule and prefer the status quo he has brought. What your brother says is true and has already occurred. Styx relayed with a more bitter tone this time. A full scowl having formed on her face by the time the 2 brothers looked back to her. My consort Pallas, in fact, is one of those who has chosen to give his allegiance to Kronos and his ilk. As soon as he heard word of what happened, he sided with Kronos and made way immediately to Mount Othries to give his support, should it be needed. I never even got the chance to try and convince him otherwise. The woman then scoffed. Not that I believe for a second that damned husband of mine would have listened even if I did. Ah, I had wondered why he wasn't here with you and your children. Gia actually winced from her spot, perfectly able to not only hear her, but feel just how scornful the eldest of the Oceanids was over it. Her smile no longer present. I could never quite get a read on how supportive he was of Cronus' regime, but I assumed that given your own distaste for them, that he probably shared the sentiment. I guess I misjudged him on that. What a shame. Yes. Quite. Styx replied brusquely. A tint of clear anger in her tone that was impossible to miss. He has made his choice in the end though, as have we. Her 4 children nodded, all looking as annoyed as their mother was at their father's show of allegiance, yet resolute at the same time in the choice they were making. By this point, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter and Hestia had gotten over the initial surprise of the 5's sudden arrival and were mainly just listening in at this point to see where it went. Hestia in particular, however, frowned deeply at what she heard about Pallas. The fledgling goddess feeling put off by him so readily ditching his family to give aid to their father, instead of sticking with them. Knowing how her father was now to some extent, she couldn't even imagine how much of a blow it'd feel like for her if any of her family decided to side with him over them, given what he was like. She could honestly tell just from looking at them now that that decision by him had hurt them all. And it would do even more so knowing that if her brother accepted their aid, there would be a high chance that they would meet head to head as enemies on opposing sides of the conflict. So, what say you, Beerus? Styx asked politely, focusing her full attention on Beerus, as she offered her hand to him. Will you accept our aid? Beerus took a small moment to ponder it. If lines were being drawn now, then it looked certain that Kronos may well end up with an army at his side as support, alongside the 5 buffoons he already had. He could, after he'd gone through sufficient training for his own true divine form, run 'em all down in his warpath towards Kronos, if needs be. That was a potential option, but one that wasn't favorable to him. Not because he didn't perceive himself as being able to pull it off, but because of just how annoying it would be to deal with them all, just to get his hands on Kronos. He had no idea how many of them would be on his side, as he had no clue how many gods or other creatures existed here as of yet. However, he could be certain that there was quite a few at least. He'd rather not waste time dealing with grunts, unless he had to, once he was ready to hunt down and obliterate that prick who'd eaten him. Having other allies fighting on his side outside of potentially all of his siblings could indeed be useful for handling Kronos' other grunts. They could at least thin the herd of idiots that had chosen foolishly to align themselves with the soon-to-be-destroyed Titan if nothing else. Provided none got in his way of eradicating Kronos off the face of this world, having more allies in this skirmish seemed fine to him. Well, seeing as you're so adamant, and you don't appear to be lying, I'll accept your offer. He said amiably, as he took her hand in his. Just so long as we're clear that none of you will get in my way when the time comes. That bastard Kronos is mine to take out. I won't accept anyone interfering with that. You have my word we won't. Styx replied without missing a beat. Her dainty hand handling the grip of Beerus's own fairly well and squeezing back assuredly. Her tone and gaze making it clear to him she was telling the absolute truth, with how serious she was. We will remain completely faithful to your side in this conflict. Whatever you may need of us, we shall give, provided we are able. Also that we may work together to put an end to your father's reign. Even if that means I send you out to fight against your own husband and father. He asked of them all pointedly. A question which got him a much stronger squeeze from Styx's hand, as her eyes began to vaguely glow an ethereal white. the children themselves gaining fierce looks of determination behind her. Definitely, she said, giving a sharp, almost ruthless smile. As I said, Pallas made his choice, and should he meet us on the battlefield, I will personally show him how big of a mistake he has made in siding against us. That, I can promise you. Hey, I'm already starting to like the cut of her jib, Beerus thought to himself with some amusement, as their hands finally separated. Very well then. Welcome aboard, I guess. Thank you. She nodded gratefully. Now that that's settled, there's something I believe should be brought to your attention straight away. All of your attentions, she said, whilst quickly running her eyes over each and every one of them, her tone turning even more serious. And what would that be? I will need to ask if you have a plan for the potential of you all getting discovered, especially if you still need time to prepare, because soon enough, this isle will be compromised. That took everyone there, other than Styx's children and Gia, by surprise. What do you mean by that? It was Hestia who spoke up first, concern flashing over her face at the Titaness' words. It is exactly as Mother says. This isle will be compromised soon enough. Nike spoke up, her own tone serious as she leveled her gaze on Hestia. Look to the sky if you don't believe me. Look to the west, in particular. They all did so, mostly out of curiosity for what she was talking about. Both Beerus and Zeus especially squinting their eyes as they looked far, far ahead into the distance and scanning the sky. It didn't take long for a few of them to spot the oddity going on in the mostly pale blue ether. Are those gold lines going through the sky? Zeus muttered the thought Beerus too was thinking, sounding befuddled. Hyperion. Rhea mouthed, her mood souring fast, as she recognized where they were coming from. The Titan's chariot. Of course, Kronos would send him out first. Who's Hyperion? Demeter spoke up this time, looking at her mother quizzically. He's one of Kronos' brothers. Metis spoke up this time, her voice as dead serious as her sister's was at this point, as she nabbed the siblings' attention. You all met him back atop Mount Othries. He's the one who fired the light beam at Beerus that almost blasted us all down. Remember? TCH. That guy again. Beerus scoffed hearing this. What threat exactly does he pose? If Kronos' so-called, all-seeing gaze, on his little throne can't find us, as you said before, thanks to Gia's magic, then how in the heck is he supposed to be a problem? He's certainly not one when he's far out, young one, but he will be if he gets close enough. Gia relayed, not looking shocked at the situation. My magic creates a protective veil around the isle that essentially makes all activity on it, as well as all those on it, completely untraceable. Unseeable. Kronos, it's true, wouldn't be able to see you all here because of that, as I can block his all-seeing gaze that uses his father's throne from down here. Hyperion, however, if he gets close enough, would be able to see and feel my power veiling over the island, no matter how well I've hidden it. And how's that? Beerus couldn't help but ask his current mentor, somewhat intrigued. His power granted through his divine domain allows him to do it. He holds dominion over heavenly light, which gives him the unique ability to pierce through the veil, so to speak, and notice things that none of his other brethren by themselves could. She explained. Which is precisely why Kronos made him their scout. Styx continued. Gia's barriers are certainly more potent than anyone else's, and for anyone else, unless you stumbled upon this isle by sheer coincidence or were tipped off by her, no one would be able to find you all hiding out here. He, however, is a problem. Soon enough, he will fly close enough to this isle that his power will have him take notice of Gear's magic surrounding it. I can guarantee you, the moment he does, he will come down here to investigate why that is. And as soon as he touches foot down on this place, like I was able to do, he will sense all of your presences on here instantly. So, what if he does, though? Poseidon spoke up, sounding confused as to why this was being taken as such a huge deal. Beerus was able to stop his attack before with his own power and overpowered one of the others back in that castle prior to that. Couldn't he just do that again with Hyperion, and send him packing? That'd only be feasible if Hyperion decided to remain in his base state. Considering what went down before though, it's highly likely he'll go into his true divine form the moment he sees or feels Beerus's presence. Metis asserted wisely. And once he does that, Beerus as he is now without one of his own, doesn't have a chance of defeating him in a direct confrontation. Oh, was all that the second youngest of the siblings could say to that, especially when Beerus himself didn't refute such a claim. Plus, even if we assume that Beerus still could send him packing even then, our position would still be compromised, since Hyperion would still know where we are, and could just tell Kronos and the rest of his allies right after the fact. Then before you know it, we have all of them descending right on us, no doubt all in their true divine forms as well. And we're nowhere near prepared for a scenario like that. Metis continued critically, highlighting what was essentially the worst-case scenario before them all. Are all of you well versed enough that you at least have full control over all of your inner power? Styx asked mainly towards the siblings, but it was Rhea who answered for them with a shake of her head. No. I'm afraid not. Only Beerus and Zeus so far have reached that point. The rest of them still have to catch up in that regard, and I'd say I'll need roughly 3 weeks to ensure they do. Well, you might have to cut it a little short then, because if I had to guess, it'll only be about 2 weeks at best before Hyperion arrives here. Maybe a day or so more if we're lucky. And if we're not? Zeus asked cautiously. It could be as low as 10 days, possibly. Styx said solemnly, clicking her tongue in annoyance. Given his current trajectory, that's the least amount of time I see it taking him to arrive here. Great, just great, Zeus groaned, pinching his eyes shut. And we can't just go somewhere else random, as Kronos will likely spot us from up above himself before Gear even has time to put a veil over us again. We could always just disguise ourselves by shapeshifting into animals and try to hide our presences. Would that work? Hades broached calmly. That might work, if it were any of the others on ground level with us. Against my brother Hyperion though. No. Such a trick would not work on him. Rhea shot down immediately with a shake of her head. A look of consternation plastered on her beatific face. I have personally bared witness to those trying such a thing on him in the past, and thanks to his domain's power, he saw through it right away. Well, that is disconcerting, Hera muttered, before an idea popped into her head. Wait, hold on. Is luring him away an option? Lure him away? You mean like a decoy? Metis asked, to which Hera nodded. I don't know, the Oceanid pondered that, while propping her chin up on a clenched hand. That could work, but it's extremely risky. Hyperion wouldn't be the only one alerted at that point. Kronos would no doubt also spot you from atop Mount Othries without Gear's protective, magical veil. Whoever would be using themselves as a decoy to draw Hyperion away from reaching this isle would absolutely have not just him chasing him down, but also Kronos and the others as well. there's a strong chance that they'll end up getting pinned down and captured, because if all of them are together, they could easily block any attempt you could make to dematerialize back here, or somewhere else. Her eyes narrowed perceptively. In fact, I'm pretty sure only one of them would be necessary to put up a similar magical field around the area from the one covering Mount Othries that they'd noticed the decoy in. From there, all Hyperion would need to do is lock you down for a short period, and then no doubt the backup will arrive, and you have little, if any chance at all, of escaping that situation. Actually, I could help with that. Gia cut back in, drawing everyone's attention. While I may not be fast enough to put a protective veil over you in time to stop Kronos from spotting you, I can get rid of that field if it's put up, allowing whoever goes out to keep on the move. But won't he know for sure then that you're helping us? Metis countered, showing the primordial a look of concern. While I don't doubt your words, Lady Gia, I am certain Kronos wouldn't take that slight lying down and will start coming after you as well. He could very well try to do to you what he did to his father in retaliation. Gia rose a brow at Zeus's consort. Not intimidated in the least by that. I have no doubts that Kronos has likely figured out by now that I am most likely helping in hiding you from him, so that may as well not be a concern. Furthermore, I hold no fear for my son. I'm the one who gifted him that favored weapon of his all those years ago, in case you forgot. I know how it works. He can come after me with it all he wishes, but it won't get him anywhere. He'd need to strike me down in my physical form, just as he did to my former consort Uranos, and I have no intention of allowing him the opportunity to get me in a similar position to what he and his brothers got him in all that time ago. Especially considering that were it not for her at that time, Kronos and his brothers wouldn't have even gotten that opportunity in the first place. I guess, Metis said uneasily. But that's assuming it's just Hyperion doing it. What happens if all of them descend at once to capture them, after Kronos spots them? If alerted to your interference, they may be inclined to go into their true divine forms all at once just to counter that. I'm not sure even you'd be able to block the field being put up by the combined power of all of them should that happen. True. If such a thing happened, even I'd be hard-pressed to hold back against them all like that for very long. Gia conceded, but looked far from put off by that fact, as she gained another knowing smile. However, there's potentially a way we can ensure that Kronos and the others won't become pursuers. Is there now? Beerus spoke up, gazing with intrigue at his current teacher, as everyone else regarded her with a similar form of interest with that statement. And what might that be? Some of you seem to have forgotten, but I'm not the only one around who can block my son's all-seeing gaze utilizing his father's throne. She looked toward Styx. There are a few others capable of it as well, and one of them just so happens to be with us here right now, who has just said she's willing to lend her assistance. Has she not? Ah, Styx grinned, as everyone turned to her. I see where you're going with this. Yes. The protogenos of the earth and life nodded, let her massive breasts jostle as she pulled one of her arms out from under them, and pointed towards the eldest Oceanid. You were able to conceal yours and your children's presence from Kronos throughout your whole journey here, if I'm not mistaken. If you are there right by whomever we send out, you should be able to do the same again for the both of you, which leaves only Hyperion, and potentially his sister wife Thea if she's with him, as your pursuers. You can focus on that whilst I focus on keeping him and potentially Thea, if he's brought her along, from stopping your ability to dematerialize away. That could actually work. Metis agreed after a bit once Gia lowered her arm, beginning to smile slightly as Hera's decoy idea now seemed to appear much more feasible. You're willing to do that, right, sister? Why wouldn't I be? Styx said bemusedly, as she glanced over at her younger sister. I said that I and my children will give aid whenever and wherever we can, and I don't go back on my word. I'd be more than happy to tag along with this to ensure it is a success. Wonderful. I guess that means Hera's idea is a go then. Metis nodded in acknowledgement in said fledgling goddess direction. Since we have a plan going now, there's only one thing to decide, and that's who'll be the bait. Isn't that obvious? Hera smiled lightly, as she pointed at her oldest brother. Beerus would make the perfect bait for that. Oh. Beerus rose a brow at her inquisitively. Pray tell, Hera, why's that? It's rather simple, dear brother. She replied whilst lowering her hand, having everyone's attention. You're the one they want the most out of any of us, after what you did back on their turf before we all escaped here. I don't doubt that out of all of us, if you were to go, then Hyperion would chase you the most fervently. And that means you've got the best shot at luring him the farthest away from the rest of us. Unless I'm mistaken somewhere, of course. That last quip seemed to challenge anyone to refute her assertion. Beerus could only chuckle at this. Hey, I guess you're not. He shrugged. Suppose it's better than nothing. You'll go along with it, then? Metis asked. Sure. I'll bite. That asshat would just get in the way of our training if I don't. He'd much prefer to beat the shit out of him for daring to stand in his way, but that was too risky given that he could go into his true divine form, and if he did whilst he was trying to batter him, it wouldn't end well. Not according to Gear anyhow, and he trusted her word enough at this point to not go for the full-on combative approach, until he was ready to deal with that transformation trump card. Recognizing this, he then turned to Styx again, looking rather nonchalant at this point about the whole thing. It looks like I'll be counting on your services soon enough. Do try not to disappoint me. I aim to please. The second-generation Titaness remarked back with a confident look. Taking no offense to his little quip at the end insinuating there was even a possibility of her not doing her part well. It should be interesting playing a little game of cat and mouse with that arrogant ass. Beerus had to chuckle once again at that. The irony wasn't lost on him, that he of all people, would be playing the part of the mouse here. Truly, this world was rather hysterical, it seemed. You said that it'd be 2 weeks if we're lucky, right? Yes. She nodded. It's the more unlikely amount of time it'll take for him, though. The 10-day window, in my opinion, is much more likely. Then we'll do it a week from now, then. Beerus decided. That'll allow me to get a bit more important training in and should mean we can appear far enough away from here due to where he is, that he's less likely to suspect a misdirection. All while we lead that fool as far away as we can from here. That sound good? That is fine. She agreed. I have no issues with that. Good. Beerus brought his clenched hands behind his back again and touched them together. Feel free to do what you want until then. Zeus. Ah, yes, brother. The silver-haired younger sibling blinked. Come with me, he said, as he started to walk away. I'm eager to learn those abilities you showed. I'll need the first the most, given what I'll be doing next week. Oh, right. Zeus nodded quickly, following along behind his elder. Just don't forget those spars you'll owe me for it. HMPH. I won't. I'll give you all your requested ass kickings, don't you worry. He then turned and looked at the others as he walked away. Hope you all enjoyed that little show before. It's over now though, so get back to your own training. Something then popped into his head, which he hadn't really thought since it had been mentioned to him until now. What with their new arrivals and the talk of gaining allies, this could be a good time to kill two birds with one stone. He then looked toward the primordial goddess of the earth. Oh, and Gia. Yes. What is it, young one? Mother Earth queried curiously. Meeting his eyes, as he momentarily halted in place. Zeus doing so as well. Seeing as I'll be leaving this island for a little while, once we give that buffoon the slip, I was thinking I might just take a detour. Try and head to this Tartarus place you mentioned and free those sons of yours. How about it? Upon hearing this, everyone had varying looks of surprise at what he'd just said. The rest of his siblings, other than Zeus, having been told about Gia's children's predicament by their mother, who felt they should know about it. Thus, they too were aware of that situation. However, neither them nor their mother had thought he'd go for them so soon. No one was more surprised at this than Gia herself, but that expression quickly gave way to an excited, hopeful smile, as his words really settled in. Her eyes beginning to gleam with joy at the prospect of being properly reunited with them. I would love that, Beerus. Please do if you can, you won't regret busting them out of there. They'll be a huge boon to you, I guarantee it. Her attention then immediately turned to Styx. You don't mind going along with him there, do you? Quickly getting over her own initial surprise at Beerus's second plan of action, Styx turned to Gia and shook her head. Almost wanting to giggle at the near childishly beaming expression Gia now had. She couldn't blame her for being like that, though. Not at all. I'd be glad to. My usual residence is a boundary between this plane and the underworld already. If we're indeed able to give that buffoon the slip, as Beerus so kindly put it, then I can take him down through there and we can head down into Tartarus to free them. I doubt it'll be easy, but the Cyclopes and Hecatonches would be huge assets, in more ways than one. That cannot be denied. Wonderful. Her gigantic globes jiggled profusely as she slapped her hands together in front of her chest and clutching them with the other almost as if in prayer. Her beaming smile damn near face splitting at this point, at the potential of her baby boys finally getting rescued from that awful place. And that was no real offense to her son Tartarus, who personified the pit beneath the underworld, but it truly was a horrid place that she didn't want any of the children she cared about being imprisoned in. They've had a bad lot for much too long now. This'll give them the chance to turn that around and be truly free, as they always should have been. Oh, I can't wait to see them again. Beerus just rolled his eyes. The goddess aura waving off of her and being infectious enough to get him in a good mood again as well. And not just him either, but everyone else as well. Just the same as what Hestia always seemed capable of, only more potent and refined. Speaking of Hestia, as the purple-haired fledgling god turned away, he caught his twin sister giving him a fond smile for what he said he'd do, as she waved him away. He just smirked back and did the same, before motioning Zeus to follow him again as he turned away fully and started walking off again. Fully intent to get himself ready for his little excursion a week from now. As he did, he missed the devious look Hera sent his way, now knowing her prime window to make her move to get back at him. As soon as he got back, she'd go for it, and he'll never see it coming. The Olympian god of destruction. Chapter 13. The Titanomachy Vi. The week passed by in no time at all. Beerus's learning of the teleportation and shapeshifting had gone on rather smoothly. After Zeus had explained how both were done, Beerus had been able to pull them off almost immediately, given he already had absolute control over his inner power in its entirety. Over the course of the week leading up to today, where Beerus would be joining with one of his new allies, Styx, in sending Hyperion on a wild goose chase, he'd made sure to train them both rather extensively. Not to the same amount of time he'd spent doing the training Gaia had set up for him to achieve his ascended state, but more than sufficient enough for him to become adept at the use of both. After all, compared to the training he was going through to attain his own true divine form, it was pretty easy, all things considered. He'd also shown his little brother he intended to keep his word and had given him 3 additional spars over the course of that week. All of which were also spectated by everyone again, and had ended with Zeus resoundingly being defeated each time. But as Zeus, or rather as Metis had so eloquently put it, the point of a spar wasn't who won or lost. They were meant for improvement mainly. And that was something both had gotten. Beerus, with the use of those 2 abilities by focusing mostly on them during said spars to become increasingly proficient in their use the best way he knew how. And then Zeus in general by learning from each mistake he made in the spars to become sharper, faster and stronger in Beerus's eyes. At the very least his punches no longer looked like he was just flailing his arms about, anyhow. Regardless, it was over now, and the time had come for him and Styx to send Hyperion well off their trail. As he came out of his shorter than usual training session using Gaia's seemingly impervious dummy, pretty much everyone seemed to have finished up what they were doing, at least for the moment, to see him and Styx off on their little detour. The instant they all saw him appear, Hestia wasted little time making her way over and giving him a warm, loving hug from the front. Her sizable breasts squishing against his chest from within her tunic. The soon-to-be god of destruction instantly feeling her warm, comforting and soothing aura wash over him, which never failed to make him feel better. "Good luck out there, brother," she said with a kind, hopeful smile as she rested her head on his shoulder. "I hope to see you return safe and sound." "Hey, I'll be fine, Hestia," Beerus replied, showing little awkwardness in her embrace, which was easily down to her uplifting, warmth-filled aura, as he patted her head and gently slinked his other arm around her. A calm, small smile on his face. "I doubt this'll take long. Fetching Gaia's sons out of this Tartarus place will probably be a longer endeavor than sending that moron in the sky well off our current residence. I'll be back before you know it." "Hey, we'll hold you to that," Hades remarked, as he and the rest of his siblings, including Zeus, moved closer to him. Their mother, Gaia and Metis staying back. He was pretty sure he spotted Amalthea as well in the corner of his eye standing near the mountain cave's entrance as well to see him off. "In any case, when you get back, how's about a spar?" his ghostly pale brother said with a smirk as he jutted a thumb over in Zeus's direction. "As insightful as it is watching you and Zeus go at it, I'd much prefer to get a more hands-on experience." "Same here." Poseidon nodded with a bit of enthusiasm. A little nervous at the prospect, but excited nonetheless. "I'd like to get in on that as well, if you don't mind. After seeing those spars between you and Zeus, I can't deny I'd like to see where I stack up after all the effort Mother's put into us, and how I could further improve." HMPH. Is that so? Beerus smirked himself at their requests. According to their mother, following the latest spar with Zeus yesterday, It had also been quite beneficial for the rest of his brothers and sisters, with their improvement rate, in her own words, becoming significantly better overall from watching them and soaking it all in. That being true, if they wanted a spa, this could be a good way for him to check that himself. He'd be lying after all, if he said he didn't have some investment in seeing how they'd progressed, and outside of Demeter early on, he hadn't gotten hands-on with any of the others, excluding Zeus obviously. And this lent itself as a good opportunity to do that. Very well, if that's what you want. Beerus agreed with a small nod, as he and Hestia separated. An idea popping into his head then. In fact, you know what? I'm feeling a little generous, so seeing as I haven't been directly involved in the rest of yours training yet, how about I have a spar with each of you once I get back? I'll take one of you on each day starting from tomorrow, how's about that? Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Hades nodded, as did Poseidon in agreement at this, while Zeus just shrugged with a smile, knowing he'd get his own anyway. What say you, Hestia? Would you be up for that? Beerus asked politely, given he was regarding his favorite sibling, as she stepped back to the side. I know you're not one for violence, so if you don't want to do anything more than what you're already doing on that front with our mother, and would prefer something else, feel free to let me know. Hestia simply regarded him with a serene grin. The offer for an alternative is appreciated, Beerus, but I must say that I'd prefer to spar with you. As you said, I may not like violence, but I understand with the way things are right now, that I will definitely have to step up and fight as well. That has been clear to me for some time now. It'd be best if I was fully prepared for that, rather than underprepared. Beerus nodded in acknowledgement, not disputing the claim, nor did anyone else. In fact, the others bobbed their heads resolutely in consensus with her words. Something that made it clear that he, and Zeus he supposed, wouldn't be the only ones of their siblings directly battling against Kronos and the Titans. As if that hadn't been obvious enough already. And to think, he'd once believed she'd stick behind with their mother a while back once he got them out of Kronos' belly, whilst he went out to deal with him and whoever else on his lonesome. It felt good in a way, to know that all of them were prepared to back each other up and were so open about it. That had been something he and Champa had never really had, though they'd still cared about the other in the end. Funny how life worked. Very well then. Just so long as you're aware that I won't be going easy on you. Beerus finally said back somewhat teasingly, but also serious at the same time. Though, admittedly, just the thought of striking her, even for him, felt like a disgusting act. He'd still do it though, if it meant she would be good to go. After all, their enemies would definitely not be pulling their punches, and it'd be ludicrous to think that they would. He may have gotten a little softer, he had to admit that at this point, but he hadn't gone that soft. I wouldn't dream of it, Beerus, was her response. The smile and pleasant attitude never leaving her. Feel free to go as hard as you want on me. I know it'll be for my own benefit in the end, after all. And besides, it also means I get to spend a bit of extra time with you, which is always nice to have. Hestia, I swear you are too good for this world, sometimes. Beerus thought earnestly, as he shook his head in bemusement. I'll have to agree with Hestia on that one, said Demeter kindly with a smile that seemed mostly innocent, as she stepped closer like Hestia had done. Just one short step away from glomping him, as she threw herself into him with a hug of her own that was a wee bit too enthusiastic, hopping off her feet as she circled her arms around his neck. all but squashing her own perky pear into his chest as she did. You were such a good help for me last time, Beerus, so I know you'll be a great help in this as well. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. That's good to hear, Demeter, he responded with notably more awkwardness, giving her a light pat on the back. The elder cringing inwardly and scrunching his face a little as she pecked him thankfully on the cheek this time, something a certain other sister of his didn't fail to notice, as the blonde separated from him and gave him a wink. One that, again, he was sure a sister shouldn't quite be giving to their brother. Good luck out there from me as well. Though, I'm sure you won't need it. Right, Beerus recovered relatively quick as she stepped back, and he found his attention going over to Hera then, who'd folded her arms around her waist as she eyed him with an odd smirk on her features. You already know what my answer is, she said confidently, her prideful attitude shining through. As I told before our training began, try not to dissatisfy me with your guidance, Beerus. HMPH. Still with that cheeky mouth, I see. Beerus smirked back at her amusedly, recalling her words from back then quite well. I look forward to seeing for myself if you've got more than just sass to you, Hera. With that, he made to walk away. I'll see you all again in a bit. Expect for me and Styx to bring back some more company. And expect for me to give you a little surprise when you get back, Beerus. Hera's smirk turned devious, as she watched his retreating back. Styx, you ready to go? Beerus called out to the Titaness, who appeared to have been in a bit of a conversation with her assembled children off to the side prior to that. She turned to him, long wavy brown hair swishing lightly in the wind along with her white cloak, as she gave an affirmative nod. Her expression mostly serious, but with a hint of a smile on her beautiful face. Yes. I'm ready whenever you are, Beerus. Good. Beerus glanced towards Gia, her massive mounds giving a light wobble as she gave him a thumbs up. Her expression downright giddy knowing this was the day she would likely be reuniting with her unjustly imprisoned children. Then again, she'd pretty much been like that throughout the whole week leading up to now, and he imagined she'd be like this tenfold once he actually brought them back here. Not giddy enough, however, to forget to tell him to be on guard down there. Though she couldn't confirm it, she had made sure to let him know earlier in the week that there'd likely be someone guarding the space that her sons were trapped in. No doubt ordered to do so by Kronos. As to whom though, even she didn't know, as they'd likely originate from down there, putting 'em outside of even her domain. There hadn't been much concern for it though, as she knew how powerful he was even without his own true divine form yet, and even if not, Styx was with him as backup. The warning was more of a simple heads up to expect some opposition, and that was about it. His mother gave a proud smile at him for all the effort he was putting in for the rest of them. Her arms folded just beneath her bosom as she mouthed to him see you soon, son. Metis simply gave him a silent, but respectful look as she folded her arms by her waist as well. One that bid him farewell and good luck in getting the job down without actually saying a word, as she gave him a small nod. Showing confidence in his ability to get this done, after what he'd accomplished thus far. Just before we go, make sure that you stick close by me. If you end up straying, I won't be able to shield you from Kronos' gaze above in the heavens. Styx explained, as they came within breathing distance of the other a few paces later and Beerus turned his attention completely to her. The Oceanid wasting little time in offering him a hand then. The motion peeling her flowing cloak open slightly to reveal bit of her creamy legs. We'll also need to be making physical contact in order for us both to dematerialize with the other and appear in the same location, so take my hand. Fair enough. Beerus agreed, gripping the aforementioned dainty hand with his own, even if he still wasn't a fan of this sort of physical contact. They'd need to be on the same page for this, and if this was a requirement, he could more than put with some basic handholding to get the job done. So, what way would like to go about this to start off? She asked, meeting his gaze before staring up into the sky, where the golden lines left behind by Hyperion's chariot could be seen in the distance, which was definitely a good deal closer than it had been a week ago. We can simply appear east or west near where he is and wait for him to spot us. Or, this time, Styx, smile broadened with a mischievous edge to it. We could get his attention the old-fashioned way, if you know what I mean. Beerus, catching on to what she meant by that almost immediately, chuckled as he gazed towards the sky with an amused, but somewhat vicious smile. Oh, I'm definitely going to like having you around. Above in the heavens, a good distance away. So, any luck yet finding 'em yet on your end? Thea asked somewhat casually, leaning her elbow over the side of the chariot, resting her face over her palm. Her deep, shimmering blue eyes glancing at her consort as she took a small break from surveying the passing ground below. Because I'm still drawing a blank. Not yet. Hyperion replied, whipping the reins over his stallions as he kept a leveled expression. I get the feeling we're getting closer though. You do, huh? She quirked a brow curiously. Has your domain tipped you off yet to something that could be hiding them? No, not yet. He shook his head. Just a gut feeling is all. Like I'm about to run into something fammy ugh. Thea's eyes widened as she caught something suddenly strike her brother husband in the face before he could finish. A shockwave suddenly following, spreading out from around the chariot and rocking it, as before she knew it, Hyperion was sent flying off the vehicle and plummeting at breakneck speeds to the ground far below. His body crashing into the landmass and causing an explosion of force as he struck it, sending debris flying everywhere as he was laid out in a massive crater that could be easily made out from the chariot's current position in the sky. That's good instincts. Too bad it didn't help you. Thea heard a male voice she hadn't heard before say mockingly, causing her gaze to snap towards the direction it had come from as two shadows cast over her. Her eyes widening further as she saw a purple-haired god that perfectly matched the description she'd been given of the main one they were hunting's appearance, and perhaps more shockingly, the cloaked form of Styx next to him. Both figures hand in hand as they now stood perched atop the edge of the chariot she was by. The former lowering his other foot, which was smoking a little from the kick he'd just delivered, to the edge. Thea quickly rose to her feet in a small panic, only to find a foot being slammed into her face before she could fully react. Styx's cloak billowing back behind her, leaving her outstretched, curvy leg in full view as another shockwave burst forth from her own strike, sending Hyperion's consort hurtling back in relatively the same direction he'd gone. Her body crashing into the ground below as well, forming a crater beneath her that, while not as big as the first one made, was still pretty damn large. Nice kick. Beerus complimented, as Styx brought the lithe appendage back beneath her rustling cloak. Same to you. She nodded with a pleased grin. Though I suppose that's to be expected from someone of your caliber. Hey. Don't bust out the praise just yet. Better if we wait until everything's set and done before we start patting each other on the back. Beerus's gaze fell down to where they'd launched the two, as did Styx, just as Hyperion rose to a knee and glared up at them. Hey jackass. Were you looking for me? He shouted down to him over the roaring wind, flashing a toothy smile. Well, I'm right here. Now why don't you come and get me? Hyperion's face contorted into a mask of pure rage as his body dematerialized from where it had been launched. Just as his far larger form rematerialized on his chariot and struck out with a fist, the duo had vanished into golden specks, leaving him the sole inhabitant of the vehicle for the moment. Ichor spilling from his mouth as the side of his face was somewhat indented. His head snapped left and right with an infuriated expression as his eyes glowed with a divine flare. You little shit. He yelled furiously, heavenly light radiating from his body as a golden aura overtook his form. You dare to test me? Do you have any idea who you're messing with, you punk? His sister wife was quick to reappear beside him not a moment later as the chariot and steeds had halted their travel. Her expression holding more of a cold fury to it, as unlike her consort, her face had already fully recovered from whatever damage the kick may have inflicted on her. Her eyes spotting the duo now looking up at him from the ground to the east a good distance off. She needn't have bothered to tell Hyperion this though, as it was clear he already knew where they'd reappeared, and glared daggers down at their direction. Well, more specifically Beerus, as he didn't seem to care about Styx's presence like she had. Though that could easily be put down to the animosity he felt toward him trumping any amount of surprise he also may have felt seeing her down there with him, as his aura started to become denser. His power spiking skyward with his raw emotion. You're going to regret showing your face to me again, you cocky little bastard. He roared, as his form began to glow brighter and brighter, beginning to light up the sky now. I'll show you just how far beneath me and my brothers you are. How inferior you truly are, here and now. Styx only showed a hint of concern as she felt his power begin its ascent, and it became clear what he was about to do, but otherwise remained calm and collected. This was it. He was going to use it right away, as she thought he might do when confronted with Beerus again. With Gear's help though, they still had a good chance at this. And if things went sour for them, she was prepared to use her own true divine form if need be to ensure their plan could still feasibly work, since Beerus didn't have his own yet from what she understood. She then glanced toward him and told him to get ready, as they felt the Titan's power rise and rise. His ascension to his true divine form being imminent. Beerus merely smirked at this, however. And from her perspective, seemed to be rather amused at what Hyperion had just shouted down. And that was because to Beerus, with all the experience he'd had from back in his old days unbeknownst to her, he knew an overly emotional fighter when he saw one. Particularly those that were angry, and clearly felt slighted, and the Titan up above fit the to a T more than he'd been expecting. Surprise attack or not. Which meant he might be able to make this even easier than anticipated, if he played his cards right here and now. You're pathetic. The purple-haired deity suddenly said loud enough for them all to hear. You're calling me inferior, yet you're not even hesitating to jump into your true divine form for someone you claim is far beneath you. Ha! Just who the heck do you think you're fooling with that garbage? What? The Titan's ascension paused briefly upon hearing this, as his glowing eyes bared down on them, boring a hole through Beerus' skull. You claim I'm far beneath you and the rest of those buffoons, yet you need your ascended form to prove that. Surely you could do so with your normal state if what you said is true. Unless, of course, I'm to take you using your true divine form right away as an admission that you don't have what it takes as you are now. Beerus's smirk broadened. Is that it? Are you afraid that if you don't use that I'll end up slaughtering you if you manage to catch us? Just like I did to Kronos and that muscle-bound moron who got in my way last time. Styx instantly realized then and there what Beerus was doing, and why he hadn't immediately been ready to flee. The Oceanid had to do her best to hide the sly grin that was forming, as Beerus did something even she hadn't quite considered trying when going into this. Something that was well worth a shot, and if it succeeded, would certainly make what they were trying a good deal easier to accomplish. Afraid? You think I'm afraid of you? Hyperion scoffed with a near-distorted voice, whilst his body continued to glow brightly, on the cusp now of ascending to his ultimate form. You're nothing but an impudent little bastard. You lucked out last time. If we'd taken you completely serious back then and ascended sooner, you and your little group of misfits would have never made it out of Mount Othries. Ah. Was that a concession I'd just heard? Beerus taunted back with an exaggerated, gotcha, expression as he leaned his head forehead with a hand cupping his ear, latching onto his counter so he could turn it on its head. If you'd ascended sooner, huh? I knew it. His gaze turned downright smug as he pointed up at him emphatically. No, you and I both know it, don't we? That you need the true divine form of yours to come after me. Because without it, you're too damned weak otherwise, aren't you? Thea's eyes narrowed sharply from hearing those words. She'd heard about what he'd said before back at Othries a while back, but it seemed as though Hyperion hadn't been exaggerating about the sheer gall that this fledgling god had. Hyperion, however, was seething from the insult. The parting words Beerus had delivered to him before escaping Othries replaying in his head, which only further caused his rage within to boil over from the new deity's unprecedented level of audacity that he hadn't received since the days of his horrible father's reign. His fists clenched by his sides and radiating pure, heavenly light in numerous rays jutting out in multiple directions. Weak. You dare to call me weak? Yes. I do dare. Because you are weak. Beerus shot back, knowing there and then he had him, as he lowered his hand and placed it on his hip. So, you know what? Go ahead and transform if you wish. Go ahead and prove my words true. Demonstrate to us all just how worthless you are by having to rely on it to even have a chance at catching me. You piece of shit. Hyperion's teeth ground down as his hair shadowed over his eyes, his godly aura beginning to simmer down. You honestly believe I can't take you down without it, huh? I don't believe. I know you can't. The former cat deity sniped back again, taking a page out of his sister Hera's book as he turned his nose up to him. and despite how far up Hyperion, Thea, and the chariot was from him, there was no mistaking how much he appeared to be looking down on him. I can see it written all over your face. The moment you saw me, you always intended to hop straight into your ascended state, because deep down you know you're screwed without it. In that moment, Hyperion thrust his massive hand outward, sending out a large, almost blindingly bright beam of heavenly light down from it towards Beerus and Styx. Rather than just teleport out of the way, Beerus tugged on Styx' hand and forced her to crouch with him and let the huge, destructive beam sail right over their heads by a hair's breadth. It then dug deep into the ground, forming a deep chasm as it reared off into the distance, cleaving a mountain in half miles upon miles behind them before the beam dissipated entirely. The entire sequence having taken place in under 1/1,000,000,000th of a second. You loud-mouthed worm, Hyperion hid his wrath behind a sneer. His godly aura having dropped back down to its more regular state around his form, as his eyes remained lit up like a flare. His desire to transform in order to batter the cocky upstart falling away for the moment. Underestimating me will be your undoing. You want me to come for you as I am. Fine then, let's play your little game. Forget my true divine form, I can crush you without it, you miserable little shit. He exclaimed with a voice loud enough to boom throughout the area. Hey! Hook, line and sinker. Beerus thought with a toothy grin, controlling the chuckle that rose from his throat, as both he and Styx straightened up. His other hand raising up as he flipped him the bird, just as he'd done to Kronos over a month back. Oh yeah. Go ahead and try, jackass. Just as Hyperion prepped another beam attack in his hand, the two's forms shimmered away. His domain-enhanced senses picking up their new location almost immediately off in the distance, close to where he'd seared through the mountain. Thea, take the reins and steer. Hyperion all but commanded to his wife, as he grabbed and threw them to her. She caught him easily and gazed at her husband as he balled both of his hands into fists again, enveloping them in his unearthly light. His expression truly murderous from her perspective, but inwardly she wasn't much better after hearing and witnessing the cocky fledgling's insolence towards them. Which was why she proceeded to follow her consort's order implicitly and was in no way argumentative when he stated flat out, with eyes burning brighter than their sun Helios above them, I'm going to blast them to smithereens. Meanwhile, shortly after rematerializing further down from the two titans, Styx looked toward Beerus with a full-on grin of her own, as they immediately started to run further east at high speeds. Well, that was something. I expected to be having to deal with him at his height of power right now, but you just managed to goad him into coming after us without it. How did you know that would work? Beerus gave what could be interpreted as a shrug whilst they ran almost side by side. Him taking a small lead in front of her. It was more of a hunch at first, really. I could see it in the way he looked at me. There was nothing but contempt and rage there towards me. Those that are controlled by their emotions like that, are a lot easier to manipulate. He knew this not just from doing it himself to foes in the past, either out of boredom or for his own small amusement, but also from personal experience. Mostly from Whis, who at more than one point had pointed out how his own temper clouded his judgment more often than not. Something that even now, he hadn't quite shirked off. Him. Well, I can't argue with that. Styx conceded. Still, I find it quite impressive that one as young as you are is already so attuned to such a thing. Hey. Him, young. He'd just let her think that. It wasn't entirely inaccurate to be fair, at least as far as his new physical body was concerned. The compliment is appreciated, but as I said before, leave the praise for later. The two quickly veered and jumped left as a beam of light sword crashed into where they'd been and melted a huge hole in the ground. "We've got business to attend to." They both glanced back and saw their pursuers right on their tail. The chariot pulled by the divine steeds moving even faster than they were, as it quickly gained on them. The two being able to make out Hyperion stood atop the back edge now of the chariot whilst Thea steered ahead. His aura blazing with two fists outstretched to either side of him, coated and glowing intensely within what looked to be spheres made of his heavenly light. "And just where do you think you're running off to after all that big talk, you cocky shit?" he exclaimed with a ferocious scowl, before thrusting his fist out and sending another high-speed light beam directly at them. One they were both forced to hop away from again. Except instead of hitting down where they'd been, just like back in the castle, the beam of light curved and headed straight for the direction they'd dodged to. HMPH. This again. Beerus almost scoffed, as he and Styx avoided the beam of light again by jumping to the side and rocketing off in a fast sprint further east still. The former trusting his actions enough to not teleport away with him. Once again, the beam curved and followed behind him at unimaginable speeds. Beerus knew he could cancel it out like he'd done last time, but that would require more effort than was necessary, and would definitely leave them both open. Something he was proven right for thinking, as both he and Styx caught a second beam being sent from Hyperion's other fist. One which flew past where they were heading given how close their Titan pursuers were above them, before looping round in an instant and homing right in on them from where they were running to at a blistering pace, leaving them in what looked to be a pincer attack from their back and front by the two massive beams of heavenly light that were both now mere feet away from colliding with them. It was then that Beerus gave a short, wordless nod to Styx. She gave a brief motion of understanding in that tiny fraction of a second, before the light seemingly encompassed their forms. The whole area being blanketed in impossibly bright light as the two beams collided, one that could be seen for thousands of miles out in every direction before the two cancelled each other out. Thea didn't bother to ask her brother husband if he'd landed or not, as his flaring eyes glowed a little brighter. A hint of frustration evident on his angered features making it clear he hadn't landed, if the fact that their bodies weren't there where the beams had struck was any indication. Indeed, they hadn't. Beerus and Styx reappeared an even larger distance away than before, and immediately got back to running again as they were more than within Hyperion's range still. "So how far out should we take him and that stupid broad before we shirk 'em off?" he asked, not the slightest bit unnerved by Hyperion's efforts. So long as there was no ascended state being used, he knew without question he could handle him and that woman he was with chasing after them. Styx barely held back the humid snort at how he referred to the Titaness. Not that she was about to correct him though. "Well, I'd say that's rather simple. They'll throw the barrier up soon enough, I'm sure of it. We'll lead 'em to believe it's working for as long as we can, by physically dodging everything they, or rather Hyperion, throws at us. I'll let you know when we've taken it far enough, and from there, we'll dematerialize out from under their noses. Sound good? Hey." He genuinely wished he could see the looks on their faces when that happened. Given how pissed that buffoon up above was, he didn't doubt his expression following that would be downright comical. It'd make for a good laugh, he was sure. "Yep. Gotcha. I'll leave our final vanishing act to you then when that happens, seeing as I have no idea how to get to this Tartarus place without you." Instinct kicked in a minute fraction of a second later, and both lunged to the side yet again as another beam of light careened past them. They were then forced swerve left and right as one beam after another blasted down on them, absurdly bright to an obnoxious degree in Beerus's opinion, as the land around the darting forms was perforated beyond recognition. "Get back here, you little rats. I won't let you escape." They heard Hyperion roar, and immediately teleported again, landing once again much further east and bolting forward. The chariot was blazing overhead in an instant, and the angered Titan was already raining down a volley of light beams upon him, literally pumping them out through his thrusting fists. All of which the two bobbed and weaved through, only narrowly avoiding some, admittedly, as they punctured gaping holes all around them. They vanished again and reappeared way further up, and as expected, the Titan twosome and their chariot drawn by numerous magically endowed stallions was sailing right over their heads in an instant. A rain of light beams came down on them again, and it wasn't long before they teleported up again after dodging their fair share. This time, however, it appeared that Hyperion had finally had enough already of them doing that. "Thea!" he called out angrily without even down looking at his wife, as they covered the distance that Beerus and Styx had made again. The Titan basically announcing to the runaway pair what was about to happen. "Let's nip that annoying dematerialization of theirs in the bud. They won't be able to evade me for much longer if we throw up the barrier. On it." She nodded in acknowledgement, and almost instantly, their eyes glowed a similar radiance as a wave was released from them both. Unlike at Mount Othries, Beerus actually felt the barrier coming up, as it was occurring in real time rather than already being put up. Though he couldn't physically see it, he knew it was there and had manifested in a decently wide radius around them. And it wasn't stationary either. He could just tell it was moving with the Titan couple up above, as it trapped them within its invisible borders. Or so the two chasing them from above thought anyway. "This is it," Styx remarked, leaning into his ear as they ran so that only he could hear her. "Everything's going according to plan. Better even. Just keep dodging until I give the signal, okay? I'm in your hands." The purple-haired fledgling replied, as they both quickly veered hard to the left to avoid another beam attack that blasted the ground. "Nowhere to go now, you little shits. Keep running away all you want, but you won't be able to avoid my attacks forever." Hyperion sneered, his anger coming down to a more containable level, as he saw himself one step closer to taking the arrogant fledgling of Kronos out. His arms then bent by his sides and cocked back, heavenly light shining brightly from his fists, almost headlighting over Beerus and Styx despite it being the daytime. A testament to just how luminous the Titan's domain given light was even in his base state. It was about the only warning they received, before Hyperion starting thrusting both his fists out one after the other in rapid succession. His arms a blur of motion as he sent a vicious hail of light projectiles down on them rapid fire. Like all the beams previous, they practically melted through the ground as soon as Fire! The hot wind all but smashed into Beerus's face, whipping his hair back and Styx's forward with her cloak as the boat drove down at mind-boggling speeds. Fire and brimstone being launched everywhere in their wake, as their forms and the boat blurred down like a bullet, only unimaginably faster. Both Beerus and Styx held onto the boat, with the former having to squint in order to keep his eyes open with all the netherworld air, a mixture of dense steam and mist of all things at this point gushing into his face. A rather pointless endeavor, as it had become so thick as they plunged, that even he could no longer see anything in front of him other than the two inhabiting the boat with him, and only just barely. Styx's face was scarcely visible to him now, whilst Charon had practically become little more than a vague silhouette as they dropped down with the river of fire. He might as well have been blind. It felt like they were falling forever, like it'd never end. They'd just keep sailing downward at bastard high speeds for eternity. That was the initial feeling Beerus got, considering they were moving almost as fast as he could at his best, yet there looked to be no end in sight. That's how far down this place seemingly was. Eventually though, after about 30-odd minutes in real time, the boat finally splashed down at what Beerus assumed was the bottom. The freakish momentum it had had up to that point getting sucked away near instantly upon impact. Beerus felt it almost immediately even before he started looking around. The very atmosphere here was much different from even the underworld. Leaving the intense heat aside, he found himself taking back what he said about the underworld up above prior. When his eyes laid bare to the absolute hellscape where they currently were, the underworld above seemed like a paradise by comparison. The river of fire that had brought them here stretched out and looked to go endlessly off in multiple directions with no end in sight and broaden out the deeper he looked. The actual land he could see was completely barren from all life, and somehow with a more grayish tint than the land up above. Speaking of above, a quick glance up revealed nothing but pure darkness, so encompassing it was actually a wonder this place was even lit up a little. All with an extreme air of gloom and doom that pervaded throughout the entire area. A chord was struck within him the longer he looked around the desolate, fire-laden area, and without him being able to accurately explain why, he got the sense that this was the kind of place you never wanted to end up in. As though if you did, you might as well be damned. His amber eyes widened then all of a sudden. He had no idea how it took him this long to sense it, but he could feel an overwhelmingly strong presence somewhere deep in the bowels of this place. It was hard to put a gauge on exactly how strong whomever this was, but its power was definitely way less hidden away than Gear's had been. He didn't know how it'd measure up against him at his best back in his previous life as a god, but he could tell with certainty that this being held immense might. In terms of raw power, whoever the hell was down there was above most of the gods he'd known back then. He couldn't tell by how much, but from what he could currently sense, this being was definitely superior to them, which came as quite the surprise. Welcome to Tartarus, Charon groaned, the mist and steam having mostly cleared away now that they were here. This is enough from you. Thank you for your assistance, Charon, but we can handle the rest from here ourselves. Styx said kindly, giving a small nod of respect and appreciation for the ferryman's ride as she stood up. You can return to the underworld up above now. I know how much you don't like it down here, after all. Happy to be of service, the pasty-white, eyeless ferryman inclined his head respectfully as well. Given how almost no emotion showed on his face though, it was sort of hard to tell if he even meant that at all. At this point, Beerus had also stood up, giving a small bow of his head to the ferryman as well for his help, before both he and Styx hopped off the boat and onto the closest bit of land. As soon as their feet touched down, he glanced back to where the boat was, only to find it and Charon already gone. It didn't creep him out or anything, but it did let him know that teleporting out of this place, unlike going in, seemed to be possible for whatever reason. A good detail to know, though he found himself curious as to why that was the case. Okay. Now it's just a matter of finding where in here exactly the Hecatonchias and Cyclopes are held and busting them out before getting out of here. Styx basically stated the obvious, and Beerus pushed his curiosity over the teleportation detail to the side, along with the presence of that absurdly powerful being for now, seeing as it didn't seem interested in moving. Also, he could focus on the more pressing matter at hand. Guess I just have to sense out for them then, now that we're here. He thought to himself, as he quickly got to doing just that, his senses scanning over as much of this place as he could. It didn't take long for him to feel several other presences straight ahead of where they were by what felt to be a good few hundred miles. Nearly all of them were faint, but for one, and Beerus found himself turning to Styx, as she appeared to finish scanning over the place just like him. One simple question on his mind. May I ask how many of these sons of Gears would be imprisoned down here, exactly? About 6 in total, if I remember correctly. Styx told him without hesitation. 3 Cyclopes, and 3 Hecatonchias. I'm gonna guess you noticed there was 7 down this way too. Yep. Guess that meant Gia was spot on about there likely being someone guarding over them in their prison. Looks like I'll have to deal with whoever that is too. They don't feel all that tough anyhow, so this shouldn't be hard. Famous last words. Styx teased with a small, humid grin as she threw her mirthful gaze at him. Not put off by the atmosphere of the place in the least. As if. Beerus snorted. He then started to move forward towards what was basically his captive uncles. Let's just get on with it. As you wish. Styx met his stride side by side with him, as they swiftly ventured further into the place. On their way, they passed by numerous caverns that led to different areas, all of which had entrances of varying sizes. Some ranging to barely above their height and wide enough for a few their current size to fit through, whilst others were massive, reaching upward by about 50 to 100 feet or so. Those were nothing, however, compared to the one they eventually stopped at in front of a short while later. An open cavern that stood thousands of meters tall and wide, shrouded mostly in total darkness from where they stood. They needn't be able to see inside physically, however, as they could both sense the 6 figures inside, as weak as they felt right now. Up close, they could feel something encompassing the seemingly open cavern. An invisible barrier of sorts different to the one that Hyperion and Thea had used on them earlier. No doubt set up to keep them inside, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who was likely responsible for its creation. One thing was for certain though. At least one or more of the beings in there had to be enormously large to warrant the entrance and exit to the cavern being so huge. He'd naturally seen bigger, of course, Super Shenron being a prime example, but that was besides the point. All that mattered was getting them out of here. He gave a look over to his companion, who glanced back and made a motion of deference toward him and whatever he wanted to do next. And with that, he decided, it was time to get their attention. Oi! You lot in there! He called out with a loud voice that echoed deeply throughout the entire area, as he focused his gaze back into the massive cavern. You're the sons of Gear that Kronos imprisoned here, I presume. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence, save for the echo of the fledgling god's own voice. Then, once the echo of Beerus's voice dissipated, both heard loud footsteps coming toward them. Multiple sets, in fact, and it wasn't long before both he and Styx were able to see eyes staring back at them as whatever was in there came forward and stopped. It was hard to tell which belonged to who, but there was a lot of them. 3 massive, round eyes attached to 3 different, 25-foot tall, bulky-looking silhouettes closer to them looking down at him and Styx. Taking his gaze up further, the purple-haired god saw that close to where the cavern's peak was, there was what looked to be hundreds of even bigger eyes staring down at him from the top center, the top right, and the top left. The highest of which being close to 10,000 feet up from where he stood on 3 gargantuan silhouettes that took up the entire width of the cavern easily. It was then that both heard the deep, distinctly male voice from the one-eyed silhouette in the middle speak up, their cadence sounding mostly confused. Who are you? My name is Beerus, and the one with me here is Styx. The purple-haired god introduced himself and her with a smirk, as he brought his hands behind his back, bumping his fists together. She brought me here, so that I may set you all free from your unjust imprisonment down here. That got their attention. Beerus would have to admit, it was a sight to behold, watching all those huge eyes collectively widen at once from his declaration. Shock clear in the gigantic orbs, before a mixture of hope and excitement seemed to overtake them not long after. Why you will. Another, much deeper and louder voice rung out from within. This one clearly from one of the utter behemoths towering over the one-eyed ones, which Beerus was certain was the Cyclops, and themselves. Though this time, he couldn't quite tell which it was. You're actually going to get us out of here? Waiting for the echo to quell down first, Beerus then replied back with his smirk broadened. But of course. That's the sole reason I came down here, after all. I gave my word to your mother that I'd bust you all out of here, and I intend to keep it. Mother made you promise that, did she? Beerus nodded affirmatively up to whichever of the 3 colossuses, which were no doubt the Hecatonchias, had spoken. I knew it, see brothers. I told you she wouldn't abandon us. The immensely large silhouette to the left shifted, making it clear it was the one that had been speaking, as it shouted out with elated hope to its brethren. Mother would never allow us to be put down in this shithole if she had any say in it. Quite right. Beerus affirmed, after once again waiting for the behemoth's echoing voice to simmer down. G.O.D's been quite eager to see you all again, and I must say, I myself was quite intrigued to meet you all. You see, I've rather recently declared war on the very bastard that trapped you all down here, my so-called father, Kronos. His smirk turned into a vicious grin. I intend to be victorious in that, and G.O.D has told me you'd all be of great help to me in that endeavor, seeing as you all have a bone to pick with him after what he's done. Am I right? A deep, almost earth-shaking rumble sounded off from within, originating from the Hecatonchia in the middle this time. A massive grayish hand about the size of one of the one-eyed silhouettes below thrusting forward suddenly and slamming palm first into the invisible barrier, causing waves to emit from the impact. And when Beerus's gaze leveled up at the one who'd done it, he could swear that even in the darkness, he could see the being baring its teeth, from about 50 different places. One where he assumed its head to be, and the rest beneath the other sets of eyes around the area of its head, which he could now make out noticeably humongous lumps for, as it smiled at him almost ferally. Oh, you have no idea. If we weren't being sapped of our strength by this place, we would have broken out of here long ago and battered him for doing this to us. He bellowed, revealing the reason why they felt so weak, and hadn't escaped on their own. There's not a moment that's gone by where we've been stuck in here, that I haven't imagined crushing his body into paste with each of my bare hands. The other two Hecatonchias seemed to nod in agreement at this from the shadows, gaining similar toothy smiles below each set of eyeballs they had. That arrogant prick deserves nothing less for the shit he's put us in. He. I couldn't agree more. Beerus chuckled, before a dark purple aura encompassed his form, and his eyes began to glow a golden hue. Try not to get too excited though. I have my own personal grudge against him, you see, so I'd prefer it if you left his suffering to me. Rest assured though, I'll be sure to cause him enough pain and misery for the lot of you before I finish with him. Sound all right? So long as you don't mind us having a front row seat for that when you do, that's fine. Their smiles turned wider. So, you're all in then? Bet your ass, we are. The Hecatonchia responded resolutely. The other two and the Cyclops murmuring in agreement, showing their excitement at the opportunity being granted, wanting out of the pit more than anything. You get us out of here, we'll be in your debt, Beerus. So long as you don't try to throw us back in here down the line, we'll have your back whenever you need it. Good to hear. That's all I needed to know. Beerus stepped forward and clenched his fist, coating it in his dark purple aura. The muscles on his arm bulging out with veins appearing, as he brought forth a good chunk of his destructive power. His glowing amber pools aying the space that separated him and where he knew the barrier to be. Now then, you might want to step back, because I'm about to plow right through this barrier separating us. Beerus. Styx suddenly called aloud in alarm, her eyes widening. Get back, now. In that moment, Beerus' senses kicked in and he felt the seventh presence from before whizzing right in their direction from his side. Instinct took over, and following Styx' warning, he and her both leapt a good ways back as the aura around him dispelled, narrowly avoiding getting smashed into, as something massive flew by at incredible speeds. You will do no such thing. A shrill, near-ear grating female voice shrieked, as something flapped its wings before flying and looping around in the air. An audible thud echoing throughout the area, as whatever had tried to crash into him landed right in front of the barrier around where they'd previously been standing. I cannot allow you to free the prisoners. What the hell is this? Beerus couldn't help but think in a mix of befuddlement and disgust, as he got a good look in what now stood in their path. Almost having to do a double take at what he was seeing now barring his path. It, or she, he supposed, was a naked woman in appearance from the top that was about the same size as Hyperion or the Cyclops were, with small, relative to her size, pearly white breasts and pale nipples with a placid skin tone. Her hips were wide, and her waist was small, with a face that most would probably consider reasonably attractive, though it was hampered by the sharp, draconic canines jutting down and up past her pinkish lips. And if that was about it to any abnormalities in her appearance, then Beerus wouldn't have felt the kind of distaste he did right now. Sadly, however, that was about where her humanoid features ended, and where the more monstrous began. Starting with the fact that her dark green hair was long and serpentine, flowing down like wriggling snakes down to where her bottom would be, if it weren't for the fact that her lower half was also serpentine. Numerous hisses ringing out with what looked to be 1,000 vipers jutting out around the end of her lower body as feet. Jet black wings were unfurled atop her shoulders, as 50 bestial heads of lions, boars, and other wild animals were arranged on the sides of her torso. All of them growling hostilely at him, as what looked to be a deadly scorpion stinger the same color as her wings rose over her head menacingly, poised to strike at any moment. All in all, she was a real abomination of nature, if Beerus had ever saw one. She literally looked like some child's bastardized drawing brought to life, where they'd just hobbled a woman together with a bunch of different animals in a grotesque fusion. So, you're the one who's guarding 'em, huh? Beerus asked, getting over his befuddlement of her appearance pretty quick. He couldn't quite shake off the disgust though, given how much of a horrid mishmash of creatures this woman, if she could even be called that, was. The woman hissed, quite like the vipers that made up her feet. Her beady red eyes glaring down at him, as the Cyclops and Hecatonchias trapped behind her groaned at her getting in the way. Yes. My name is Camp, and I'm under strict orders by Lord Kronos to ensure those behind me do not escape. I cannot and will not allow you to interfere. Her bestial heads and vipers growled and hissed venomously in unison, all glaring a hole right through him. I shall give you but one warning, little one. Leave this domain here and now, or I shall flay your skin from your bones while I tear you to pieces for your transgression. Flay my skin from my bones while you tear me to pieces. Beerus's eyes narrowed sharply. That's quite the threat you just made. But are you aware of whom you just threatened? He asked, a dangerous edge seeping into his tone, as he stared unimpressed at the monster woman. You should know, I'm not the type that takes kindly to such empty threats being thrown at me. Empty. The she-monster shrieked with rage, the bestial heads and viper's eyes glowing red along with hers, as her glare on him intensified greatly. You dare to insult me? I'll rip your head off for that. Go right ahead and try. I promise you'll regret it. Beerus scowled, feeling that her power level wasn't even a fifth as good as his own was at its current peak. Listen here, Camp, was it? I can tell you're not exactly the brightest, so let me give you a warning. One you should have no problem understanding. His clenched fist was suddenly coated in his dark purple aura again, as it encompassed the rest of his form a second time. Get out of my way now and forget about that order you were given if you value your life. Because if you don't, his gaze turned dark and foreboding, promising nothing but destruction as he glared at her unflinchingly. I'll destroy you. Destroy me. Camp hissed angrily, her wings giving a single flap as she burst forward. Her razor-sharp mouth opened wide in a snarl as she brought her hands forward, rearing her stinger back for a brutal stab at her stationary target that was much smaller than she was. You shouldn't jest like that, little one. Charging forward, she showed no fear as she lunged in for him with her stinger. This brash attack by the she-monster was a fatal mistake, for as soon as she was within striking distance and struck down with her stinger, the purple-haired deity slipped past the skewering blow with ease. The move getting him within Camp's guard as she overextended with his own fist cocked back and pumped up with the majority of destructive force he could currently muster, as his feet pushed off the ground. And in that tiny interval before he threw his own attack, their eyes met up close, and when they did, Camp was immediately struck with the sense that she'd just made a grave error in judgment. Like she'd just cemented her own death sentence with this single act. This realization came far too late for the female monstrosity, as she saw his aura-coated fist blur towards her. There was no epic battle that took place from here between god and monster. Not even close. The altercation was over in the blink of an eye, ending just as quickly as she'd arrived to get in his way, as his balled fist impacted with her face. A deafening bang followed, like a sawn-off shotgun going off, only much worse, as the force of Beerus's punch kicked up a heavy shockwave that blew intense winds throughout the space of Tartarus they were in. Camp's whole head being obliterated from the counterblow in a ghastly spray of dark golden blood, with lumps of flesh and fragments of her eviscerated skull being launched away in the direction he'd punched, smacking against the invisible barrier. All that remained being the stump of her neck, as her abominable body flopped limply to the ground in the next instant on her front. The growls and hisses of the bestial heads and viper feet having ceased in that moment, as the main head was blown to bits. Beerus landed back gracefully on his feet with some of the monster's blood dripping off his form, as the rest splattered and gushed onto the ground as well as atop her motionless corpse. Pulling out near Styx, who didn't look shocked at the outcome, given the power she'd seen him display prior when holding back, and the power she'd sensed from the Tartarus denizen beforehand. Shouldn't jest like that, huh? Beerus snorted derisively, glancing back at the now headless monster woman. Looks like the only one jesting around here was you. If you're able to heal and come back from that, take what's just happened as a lesson to be learned. That when I'm merciful enough to give you the opportunity to back down unharmed, you should take it. He then brought his attention back to the barrier and those trapped within it, who'd stepped back as he asked them to. My apologies for the mess, but it seems it couldn't be avoided. Nobody didn't notice how casually he spoke of it, as though he or someone else had tripped and spilled ambrosia all over the floor, rather than bursting a monster woman's head apart like a balloon. Styx herself almost chuckled at the nonchalance the firstborn son of Kronos displayed after meting out such an end, temporary or not, to the 6 sons of Gear's prison guard. His attitude making it clear that the now dead Camp had been little more than a minor distraction, and one he certainly hadn't appreciated. That didn't stop the excitement from the Hecatonchias and Cyclopes from returning, seeing their annoying guard disposed of with ease. The fledgling god getting back into position with his aura flaring, as he cocked his fist back again. Now then, with that annoyance dealt with, time to get you all out of there, he remarked unpretentiously, as he thrust his fist forward, leaning his whole body into it for good measure, along with the fullest extent of his power just to make sure it broke first go. And it did, shattering like glass all around as soon as his fist made contact. The near invisible shards now dissipating into the air almost as fast as they were broken apart, as the barrier was made no more. All with an even more ferocious shockwave that resonated throughout the area, heralding the release of those who'd once been trapped behind it. The 6 brothers looked on with awe at the young god, as the sapping effect of the pit they'd been in vanished along with the barrier, as if to make it even more clear their captivity was over. Seeing he had their attention, Beerus hopped back over to his partner in crime Styx after motioning the now former prisoners of Tartarus forward to finally get a good look at them. The first of which to step forward being the Cyclops trio. All of which looked near identical when they stepped into the lighter part of the place outside the cavern they'd been in for far too many years. All of which with green tunics that fell by their knees with just a single strap holding it up on their left shoulders, exposing their well-built chests and muscular arms. The skin was tanned, and just as they appeared in the dark, each had only one massive eyeball on their heads, all the same color of brown. About the only real distinctions they had, was differing hair color. The middle having a patch of messy black hair, whilst the one on the left had dirty brown, and the one on the right had more blondish. The trio then made a wide berth for the Hecatonchias that came out next, with Styx even ushering Beerus to get back even further for the 3 behemoths as they lumbered out. Their massive, ashen grey feet stomping down into the light at several hundred meters in both length and width, making the Cyclopes nearby, and the corpse of Camp look like little more than bugs compared to them. Like their feet, the rest of their skin was ashen grey, with the only thing covering them all being smock-like, brown garments from their hips to their lower thighs. Their upper bodies were completely exposed, showing off the ultra-dense muscles that made the bulky torsos and arms. And speaking of arms, all three had 100 arms each, 50 sprouting out from either side of them, and as Beerus suspected, they all had more than one head. There was the one you'd expect to top their shoulders, but then there were the dozens of somewhat smaller ones that littered throughout their chests and shoulders, adding up to a grand total of 50 for each. All of their heads held the same dark eyes, and the main heads, as Beerus would refer to them as, all had dark, unkempt hair. The only thing really differentiating them, being the slight differences in height in his view, with the middle being the tallest, the left one coming in second, and the right being the shortest. Something that most people wouldn't bother to notice, given they were all around 10,000 feet tall, and about half as wide. Big enough to accidentally squash anything that wasn't around the size of a small mountain or bigger without even noticing. The ex-god of the now-defunct Universe 7 found himself acknowledging inwardly that the mountain-sized Goliaths were somewhat unsightly, but honestly, that was about it. He'd seen uglier. Hell, the creature he'd just smashed through was an example of that in his mind. Once the power of the Hecatonchias in particular was no longer hindered though, Beerus found himself grinning wide as he felt the true power levels, and quickly understood another potential reason Kronos had locked them away. They were strong. Plain and simple. Taking a comparison purely from a base state perspective, neither Kronos nor any of his merry band of morons came even remotely close to the power that dwelt within these trio of hundred-handed beasts. Hell, as he was now, they even dwarfed him by quite the extensive margin. So much so, that he doubted they had true divine forms themselves, because it didn't feel like they needed them. Though to be fair, he hadn't quite witnessed anyone ascend to their true divine form just yet, seeing as he'd cut Hyperion off, so his opinion on that would need to be taken with a grain of salt for now. Well then, Beerus started with a bit of amusement. His hands placing themselves with satisfaction on his hips, as the eyes of all the Cyclopes and Hecatonchias fell on him. Ready to leave, boys.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like this video if you want some more what if video. Comment 3 hearts for more what if.